Well, greetings from Embrace Church. We are a United Methodist congregation in North Lexington, Kentucky, and we journey together in the way of Jesus and the power of the Spirit to extend the loving, just, and peaceable reign of God to all. My name is John Gallagher, and this is Christina Osborne, and we are two of the pastors here at Embrace. And we're just grateful that you're taking the time to watch this video and learn more about some really important work we've been doing at Embrace around LGBTQ care and inclusion. I'll let you know right now that the video is kind of long, all right? And so you probably already have seen the length on there as you click play. I really encourage you to stick with it and watch all the way through. If you need to put it on 1.5 speed or something, I won't judge. But I encourage you to stick with it because there's a lot of things we needed to say. And we're doing a video instead of writing something up because we really had a lot we wanted to say, and we wanted to make sure we communicated it to you in the best way possible. And this is really important stuff. Our lead team has reached a really important moment in our discernment process that we've been in. And we are excited to invite the congregation to join us in a new chapter, the next chapter of our journey of learning and growing together, and hopefully growing deeper in our commitment to love like Jesus loves.
This past Sunday, on May 21st at 9 a.m., we had an informational gathering, actually the second informational gathering that we've had this spring, where we wanted to share some of our progress and decisions regarding the LGBTQ plus care and inclusion discernment process we've engaged. We had a great group of people at that meeting, but we also recognized that many were not able to join, and a lot of you probably want to know what we covered at that meeting, and we want you to know. We want to continue to be open and transparent and walk this journey together. So that's why we're sharing this video today, taking time to unpack it and appreciating your presence with us here. We want to make sure that everybody is in the loop and has access to know what is going on. So we're going to start today by recapping and briefly sharing the information that we introduced at the first of our two informational meetings this spring. The meeting that we held this past Sunday morning was the second church-wide informational meeting, and the first one that we held in March of this year was a time for us to explain what's happening in the wider United Methodist denomination. Currently, this is a time when lots of churches are discussing and even pursuing disaffiliation from the denomination. We discussed the Book of Discipline, the prohibitions that are currently in the Book of Discipline, the disagreement and the conversation that's been had throughout multiple general conferences of the United Methodist Church over lots of years. And we also talked about the special provision that allows churches to disaffiliate through the end of this year. Churches in our city have had these conversations. Some churches have even voted, and our church has not been discussing disaffiliation. Instead, we've been in a discernment process about the care and inclusion of our LGBTQ plus siblings. We actually received a question from multiple people after the last meeting that really is a good one for us to address today. People said, if we end up not agreeing with the prohibitions in the Book of Discipline, and if those stay after the next general conference, then why would we not be discussing disaffiliation as an option? And so I just briefly want to respond to that with a few reasons that the lead team has decided are pretty compelling for us at this point in our journey. First of all, we want to wait and see what happens at General Conference 2024. After the disaffiliations that are happening this year, we expect that there is going to be a different conversation happening at General Conference, that the landscape of the denomination will look different, and there could be changes coming that nobody can really articulate right now until we get to that meeting. So we want to wait and see what happens. We also don't want to respond with fear or false urgency about property matters or what it might look like to make sure that we can keep our building. We just want to be very patient and participate in ongoing discernment as we see what unfolds before us. We also, and maybe this is even the most important reason, truly do desire to seek and maintain unity. We believe that even after General Conference 2024, if the prohibitions haven't changed, and if we come to a place as a congregation where we don't agree with the prohibitions, we believe it's possible to be a dissenting voice, to try and be a voice for change, even within the denomination. And another reason for us to choose that posture, to choose to stay in the United Methodist Church, is because there is lots of really great work and ministry being done by this international denomination all over the world. There are incredible ministries and even relief ministries like UMCOR operating because of the United Methodist denomination around the world. And we believe that being on mission with the UMC is still a good fit for us. So I also just want to give one quick matter of clarification regarding the structure of the United Methodist Church. This was another maybe misunderstanding or lack of clarity that we thought could have come from the first meeting and our discussions there. A lot of our congregation maybe doesn't come from a United Methodist Church background and maybe doesn't know much about the structure of the church. And so I just wanted to share that we are not a church with congregational polity. We're not structured so that the congregation votes on matters of practice or policy. Instead, we have a lead team, which we've been talking about the lead team's discernment process. And that group has really taken on the responsibility and the authority to make decisions for the entire body. And that is an authority and a responsibility that our lead team takes very seriously. It is something that they put a lot of prayer and time and ongoing conversation into. And honestly, we have kind of entrusted the lead team to kind of bear that burden to some extent as a congregation. So that means there aren't congregational votes in the United Methodist Church really about pretty much anything. So when we hear about churches voting to disaffiliate, that is very unusual. That requires a vote because it really is the end of a relationship with the denomination. But if we're part of the denomination, which currently we are, then votes are not a typical part of the way that we do business. So we just wanted to clarify that we're not going to be taking votes necessarily about positions or policies, but we do want to have an ongoing conversation with the congregation. And these meetings are an attempt for us to open up conversation and to continue to help people feel involved, and they have an actual impact on the path that we're walking together. One of the ways that we want you to be able to know that what you're saying and the feedback you're offering has an impact is by letting you know that another piece of feedback we received after the first meeting was a question about a survey. Folks were grateful for the meeting, grateful to be having this conversation, but wanted to know how we were going to make feedback accessible to the larger congregation, even folks who couldn't have attended the meeting. So we listened and we created a survey, which we sent out, and we had almost 70 people participate in that survey, which is a really encouraging number. Because that's not just 70 individual people. Many of those people represent households, and so we see this as a really great amount of participation. And as a pastoral staff and as a lead team, we are really grateful and really excited to know that our congregation is this invested in this important conversation. One of the ways that we want to affirm that your voice and your input really matters in this process is by letting you know that we have done a congregational survey because that's something that was suggested and requested at our last meeting. Multiple people asked the question, how are we going to make feedback accessible to the entire congregation? Folks who weren't able to attend the meeting, how are they going to be able to have a say? So the lead team created and sent out a survey, and I'm excited to be able to tell you that close to 70 people participated in that survey. And that's not just 70 individuals. A lot of those individuals represent households who participate in our community. And so that's a really impressive and really exciting level of participation for our church body. As a pastoral staff and as a leadership team, we just want to say thank you for taking this conversation so seriously. We're incredibly encouraged to know that so many of you are so deeply invested in this journey that we're on together. And so today I just want to hit on a few of the highlights of the information that we learned because of the survey. The first thing I want to do is acknowledge that we actually share a lot in common on some really important questions. The results of the survey show some positive agreement that is worth highlighting and looking at together today. For instance, on the question that we asked about whether or not Embrace would be a safe place to bring someone who's part of the LGBTQ community, we saw an incredible response where most of you, a large majority, said that you believed it already was a safe place. So 86% felt positively, either agreed or strongly agreed, that this is a safe community to bring someone who identifies as LGBTQ. And 98% were neutral or better on this question. So that says to us that even though we don't have a definitive stance, which is often considered something important to make a space safe, that the welcoming nature of our community and the way that folks treat one another makes this place feel safe. And we also even heard that response from members of the LGBTQ community who identified themselves on this survey. And that is just such an encouraging reality. So we want to thank you for being a church who creates a safe and welcoming place just by the way that you interact with one another, by the way that you take seriously following Jesus and trying to love one another. We are grateful to be able to put numbers like this up on the screen and show that we agree that this is a safe place, and largely that's because of the way that you have invested in this community. The other way that we want to show that we have a lot in common today is by looking at question number 11 from the survey, which asked for you to rate your interest in participating in learning opportunities related to faith, sexuality, and gender identity. We listed a couple of different options, what that might look like, and we again saw a great response as to the interest that you all have. So 64% answered either extremely interested or very interested about having a desire to learn and continue on this journey of understanding. And 89% have at least some interest. That means 89% of our community is willing to say, I still have something I can learn here. This is a posture of humility that I think is incredibly encouraging and often even rare, maybe, in church circumstances. And I think for us to be able to say together, we don't have everything figured out, so let's keep talking, let's keep reading, let's keep learning, is a beautiful picture of the way that the Spirit is working among us and helping us to grow and journey together. So those are some really beautiful ways that we can acknowledge we share a lot in common, thanks to the survey questions that we received and that you all answered. And we also, in reading the survey, discovered that we have some differences. But before I give a snapshot of what those look like, I want to draw our attention back to one of our main 6 values here in the Embrace community. And that is that church equals diverse family. This is one of the values our lead team worked to establish really when I first came to the Embrace community, so about 7 years ago. And over those years, we have used this language, we've referred to these values in sermons, and they have really and truly shaped our culture, which I think is one of the reasons that Embrace feels like the safe and welcoming place you all acknowledged that it is. And when we say church equals diverse family, we mean we value diversity. We think that's the biblical picture. We think that's what we're meant to look like as a church family together. And so when we have differences, when we can identify that we aren't all thinking or acting or being exactly the same, that's something worth celebrating. So as we look at a snapshot of these differences, I just want to remind you that we as a pastoral staff and as a leadership team don't see these as threats. We don't see this as a reason to be afraid. We don't need everybody to think exactly the same way. And in fact, it enriches our conversations when we come from different perspectives and bring our background and our learning with us to the table. So one of the differences that we encountered when we were looking at the survey results was actually about current views. So this is how people self-identify, how people would currently describe their own views on faith and sexuality. So before we really break down kind of these percentages, I just want to acknowledge that language can be very restrictive, and we know that that is the case even with this survey. The language that was offered was side A, affirming. The next question is actually also going to use the label progressive to talk about that viewpoint, or side B, traditional. And progressive and traditional are labels that have often felt political or have seemed to box us in ways that are unhelpful. And so we want to acknowledge that that might not be the best language to talk about this. It's not the only language to talk about this issue. And those categories really don't allow for the nuance that's present in this issue. So while those things are true, we adopted this language on the survey from Love Boldly, which is the consulting organization we worked and talked with at the beginning of our lead team discernment process in 2019. And we felt like it was relatively recognizable language that gave us a place to start this conversation. So that kind of understanding of limitation aside, as we look at this graphic together, I want to acknowledge that the largest chunk, that green chunk up at the top, is on the side A, affirming view of faith and sexuality, and that makes up 48% of the respondents on this survey. And so that is the majority of the breakdown. But I want to draw attention to the fact that that is still less than half. It's close to half, but it's still less than half. And we have all these other views represented. So there is about 8% who identify or would call themselves traditional or side B on views of faith and sexuality. There's also folks who represent somewhere between B and X, and those are kind of on the traditional side of things, but maybe even a little more restrictive as well. So those are there. But a large chunk, again, of people have said they are somewhere between side A and B, so somewhere between affirming and traditional, or that, to be honest, they're not sure. And so when we add somewhere between A and B and to be honest, I'm not sure together, that percentage is almost about as big as the side A affirming percentage. And what that tells us as a leadership team is that our congregation is still figuring things out. The people who are decided in an affirming direction, but almost just as many of us are still trying to figure out where we land on this issue or fall somewhere in a gray space. And so that tells us that we need to continue talking and that we can really see fruit from continued conversation, because a lot of us desire to continue learning. Like we saw in the slide earlier, 89% of us, whether we're decided or not, want to continue learning. And so we're really excited to see this breakdown and to know that we have a lot of different viewpoints that can come to the table. So our next question that highlights a difference is what people would like our church to kind of adopt as a view moving forward. And so we had support side A or support side B here, and then we also had stay away from sides. And so as you can see, like on the last question, the support side A is the larger chunk. And actually an interesting thing to note is that 60% of respondents chose to support side A here, as opposed to the 48% who said that they claimed side A. So that's an interesting number for us to look at and to acknowledge that perhaps some folks who are undecided or some folks who land somewhere other than side A might still be interested in supporting side A. But there are still folks who are interested in the church supporting a traditional side B view. And there is a very significant amount, 30% of individuals who responded to the survey, who don't want us to use that language or pick those sides. And again, we see here a desire for our community to be able to continue to be diverse. We see this staying away from sides desire as maybe some bridge building identity. As a part of who we are as Embrace is not just a diverse family, but a place where we want people to be able to worship alongside each other, whether they agree on this issue or not. And we really do think that's possible. We think it's possible to stand next to each other and worship and to walk towards Jesus together, even if we don't agree on this or many other issues. And so again, we're encouraged as we look at this, even though we see we have differences, it is clear that there is a posture, again, of desire for us to continue to be a place where there is open conversation and where people who are different and disagree can worship together. So those are the highlights of the survey that we wanted to be able to share with you, except for one additional slide where Pastor John is going to spend some time discussing those results with us.
All right, so we're going to put a graphic on the screen of another question that we addressed in our survey, and I want to talk about it just for a moment. So as this graphic shows, the question is, I believe our church is welcoming to diverse viewpoints and perspectives on sexuality and gender identity, both traditional and progressive viewpoints. And a large majority of folks indicated that they think our church is welcoming to diverse perspectives and views on issues of faith, gender, and sexuality. However, some people did indicate on the survey that they believe our church is only open to progressive viewpoints. And I want to take a moment just to thank you that you're willing to share that, and you were willing to share your perspective on that question. And we do care about this, and I just want to say a few words about that particular question on the survey. You know, over the last few years, if you've been in Embrace for a while, you'll understand what I'm talking about. If you're relatively new, maybe you don't. And so I'll give you a little bit of context about our church and kind of how we've tried to engage different social issues and things going on kind of in our broader society and things that are impacting people in our church. Over the last few years, we've been trying to have those kinds of honest conversations about things happening around us in our community. We talk at Embrace about reading the Bible and also reading the moment. It's similar to what Karl Barth famously said many, many years ago, that he holds the Bible in one hand and the newspaper in the other hand. And we don't really read newspapers anymore, but it's kind of the idea you get that we are reading our Bibles, but we're also trying to pay attention to what's going on around us and really try to ask questions about how the Bible speaks to the moment that we're in today. And so we believe that biblical theology and Bible study must speak to the current moment we face, or it really lacks power to impact our lives today. And so we've talked about stuff. We've talked about social issues and crises and politics and other current events. And wading into these waters has been a bit messy at times because we're dealing with really complicated and challenging stuff right now in our world. I remember back, for me personally, I think a big shift in our church happened in 2016. And y'all probably remember 2016. A lot happened during that year that was really hard for America and for even our broader world. I remember the summer of 2016, there were two black men that were killed by police officers, Philando Castile and Alton Sterling. And I remember in that moment in particular, there were folks within our church, particularly black folks within our church, friends of mine, people committed to this congregation who spoke up and said to me, like, John, I think we need to talk about this. I think we need to begin to address and speak to this just awful racial injustice that we're seeing all around us and these lives that are being taken. And so that really was a spark for me as a leader, particularly as a white leader, to have the courage to stand up and say, hey, I don't have all the answers, but we really need to start digging in to this. And we really need to start asking questions and talking about how our Bible and how our theology impacts how we view these issues of injustice and oppression and inequity that we're seeing all around us. And so ever since then, we've been trying to wade into those waters, and we don't get it right all the time, I'm sure. I know we don't. But we do believe God's called us to take that risk and to try to have some of those difficult conversations. During the pandemic, it was particularly hard, I think, to do that, but we tried to do it anyway. You know, we were forced to being on church on Facebook Live, which is not the greatest way to do church. We were doing church online, which I'm getting flashbacks of that right now, shooting this video and doing it this way. And in some ways, those are good memories. In some ways, not so much, because a lot of it was just really hard for us. The pandemic itself was hard for us. It forced us in isolation. We were dealing with loneliness, but we also saw in our society there was a lot going on. The pandemic exposed a lot of injustice in our nation, a lot of inequity in the ways people were impacted by the pandemic. People said the pandemic impacted everybody, you know, and it did. But the reality is the impact wasn't felt as much by those who had more privilege or wealth, and we were seeing a lot of that take place, and we wanted to talk about it. In 2020, if y'all remember, Ahmaud Arbery and Breonna Taylor and George Floyd were all killed in a very short amount of time, and it led to massive protests all across our world. And we talked about that, and we did a couple of book studies on racism and had those conversations. We also faced a volatile presidential election. We had the attempted insurrection after that. And on top of that, we were all as individuals and families, and we were isolated, we were lonely and depressed, and even dealing with grief as we lost people that we love. And even just talking about it, I'm like, man, it was so overwhelming to experience all that we did. And we talked about all this stuff. We tried to be honest and have our eyes wide open to both the hope and also to the horror that we see all around us. And I'll tell you that talking about a lot of that stuff was hard to do online because we couldn't see each other's faces. You know, when I'm speaking about hard things or divisive things, you know, it's hard when I can't see your faces and see how you are reacting to it. And often in the comments on Facebook, it's the people who agree with what you say that are commenting. And so I can imagine that maybe for folks who are uncomfortable with some of the things we talked about, or maybe disagreed, maybe it felt a little isolating and you wondered what your place was at Embrace. And so we just want to acknowledge that. And during that time, we couldn't give hugs to people we disagree with. We couldn't talk through these issues face to face. It's so much better, I think, to deal with things in person, particularly hard things. And so I acknowledge that that might have been hard for some of you, particularly in the ways we sought to engage our current moment. But even though it's difficult and messy, we believe that doing theology in the midst of that messiness of our world is really important. And it's going to be challenging, and we certainly are not going to get it right all the time. But nonetheless, we're still going to press into that. Another thing I want to say is that, you know, particularly for those of you who indicate that you think our church may be primarily or mostly just open to progressive views, we don't want to be a progressive church. That's not who we are. We are a church that's really about Jesus. And we want to be a Jesus-shaped church that keeps Jesus at the center. That is one of our values, the first and most important one, that we keep Jesus at the center. We want Jesus and his life and his teachings and his example. We want the biblical witness to inform and guide the way we live in this world and the ways we think about things in this world. And occasionally we may talk about things, and Jesus and the Bible may lead us to take a position on an issue that seems to be really important, and it may sound progressive or it may sound traditional sometimes, but ultimately we're trying to allow Jesus and the gospel and the biblical witness to inform how we live in this world. And it's not always going to be 100% clear on how we do that. And so we all need to be very open-minded. And we need to be honest with each other so that we can learn and together and be shaped and transformed by our just conversations with one another, and also so that we can be the best church that we can possibly be. And I just want to say, if you've been hurt in any way, we sincerely apologize, because we actually and genuinely want all voices to be heard. Everybody has a seat around our table at Embrace, knowing that this church has all the correct views and we all bring something to the table. And so I want to speak even specifically to those of you who may see yourself as being maybe more traditional or conservative. We certainly want you here at this church. We want you to bring your experience and your concerns to the table so that we can all learn and grow together. The leaders at Embrace, I can speak for myself and the other pastors, and also from the lead team, we want to hear from you, especially if you've had an experience of here at our church of feeling silenced or unheard. Our doors at our church are literally open to you. Our offices are right down there. If you stop by, we're often here. You can set up a meeting with us, and we want to meet with you. And so we're actually going to give you an opportunity at the end of this to connect with us and request that you want to actually have a meeting with a pastor, and that would be wonderful to have those conversations. So, I mean, I just also want to say personally, like, as your pastor, I want you to know that if I ever say anything that concerns you or confuses you or makes you uncomfortable, which I probably will, because I have a lot of opportunities to share at our church, and I also do want to push, and I want to challenge at times. I want us all to be challenged to think deeper and to maybe think differently about things sometimes and have an open mind. But if I ever say anything that concerns you or confuses you or makes you uncomfortable, please reach out to me. I want to have those conversations with you, because that helps me to grow as well and me to become a better pastor. So I just wanted to make sure that we address that question, because it really meant a lot to us that y'all were willing to be honest in that answer. So as Christina pointed out, we share a lot in common at our church, which is great. I'm so thrilled to be at Embrace. We share so much in common with one another. But the reality is we also have disagreements. And particularly we have disagreements around how our faith impacts our views on sexuality and gender identity. It's just true. The survey showed us that, and I'm not surprised by that. That's what I expected to find out. I would be more surprised if we all thought the same. We all have traveled very different journeys to this place where we are today, and we all carry a lot with us, a lot of experiences. We've been shaped by all of the things that have been a part of our journey, and that impacts our views on a lot of this stuff. And we at Embrace, we believe that it's okay to disagree, and we can still stay together in that disagreement, as long as we maintain a spirit of humility and love. We believe that we can still be in the same church, that we can worship alongside each other, that we can serve alongside each other, if we disagree on how the Bible and how our theology speaks to our views on sexuality and gender identity. We believe we can stick together. One of the most predominant themes in the New Testament is unity. It's all over the New Testament. Jesus talked about it a lot. There's a part of the New Testament where Jesus tearfully prayed that his followers would be one. If we think about the letters in the New Testament that were written by Paul and Peter and John, you could argue that the most predominant theme there is unity. They were relentlessly pleading with their churches to stick together, even as their churches faced serious disagreement and conflict related to culture and ethnicity and biblical interpretation and morality and beliefs. And they're just like, we've got to stay together. We've got to fight for this unity because it's so important. And part of the Holy Spirit's mission, I believe, is to create unity and to bring us together. And so, in the spirit of the New Testament, I'm asking that you consider staying committed to each other through this next chapter of our journey together. I'm asking that all of you, regardless of where you're at on these issues, that you would lean into each other and see how God speaks to you over the next few months as we learn and as we grow together. So the lead team, we don't see this moment or this meeting as the end of a process. I think I kind of had a thought, like as I started this a long time ago, that like we were going to do a lot of work and we were going to come up with a lot of good stuff and that we were going to share it and it would all be over. And I've realized as we've gone through this, that's not the way these kinds of things work. This is not the end of a process, but this is the beginning of our next chapter together. We recognize that we need to give adequate space and time to include as many people as we can in our church who want to participate in a process of learning together, just as our lead team has done. And our lead team is still doing together. The lead team has taken years to study and learn together around these issues. And we have found some common ground, but it's taken some time. And it's been through lots of debate and prayer and worship and study. We've had to be very patient with one another, and we had to trust the process. And we're asking that you all be patient as well. When we began our discernment process, we didn't know where we would end up, but we trusted that the Spirit was going to lead us. And I know that for some of you, your future at Embrace may not be 100% clear to you right now. But I'm asking that you would step out in faith, stay committed for this next chapter, and walk with us, trusting that God's Spirit is going to guide you and give you the discernment that you need as you think about your future. In a few minutes, Christina is going to share with you a little bit about how we are going to learn and grow together over the next few months. And we're really excited about some of the options. But first, I want to share a decision that we have made as a lead team. And this decision is significant, I believe, and this decision is really meant to help govern our practice together, our life together as we move forward. So here's what we're sharing today. We have adopted a non-discrimination clause, and I'm going to read that for you. And we'll put it here on the screen for you. And I'll read it twice so you'll have time to kind of get the intent of it. And if you want to screenshot it or whatever, go for it. But it says, in keeping with Embrace Church's inclusive Christian tradition and its emphasis on the dignity and worth of all people, the congregation values and embraces diversity. Employment, leadership, membership, and participation in any church activity is open to all, without regard to ethnicity, race, skin color, sexual orientation, gender identity, age, or disability. I'll read that one more time. In keeping with Embrace Church's inclusive Christian tradition and its emphasis on the dignity and worth of all people, the congregation values and embraces diversity. Employment, leadership, membership, and participation in any church activity is open to all without regard to ethnicity, race, skin color, sexual orientation, gender identity, age, or disability. Now, I will acknowledge right off the top, this is really broad and this is general. There's more we have to figure out, and we are going to share all that as it comes out, as we work through it in the future. But today we wanted to be clear about this, that the bottom line we draw is that everybody is going to be treated equally at Embrace. And so related to our discussion for today around LGBTQ care and inclusion, I just want to give a couple of examples so you can try to imagine how this plays out in our day-to-day life at the church. This means that a person who is in a same-sex relationship can volunteer, can serve, and can lead in our church just like everybody else. This means the same for a transgender person in our faith community. They can still serve in any and all volunteer and leadership capacities just like everybody else. I do need to acknowledge, though, that we are still part of the United Methodist Church, and for now, the UMC still prohibits same-sex marriages. This is a barrier, but it is the only barrier in place that prevents us from fully living into this non-discrimination statement right now. Just a reminder, the UMC has its next worldwide general conference in 2024, and there may be changes to this prohibition at that gathering. And so we plan to stay engaged and informed on this issue, and we're going to continue to discern and discuss who Embrace will be within the denomination. So like I said, this statement is broad, and it doesn't spell out everything. It doesn't spell out specific policies or steps to how exactly we are going to support and include LGBTQ people. And that work needs to be done. And we've already started some of that work, but it's going to take more time. And frankly, it's going to take more conversation, not just within our leadership team, but with the broader church, to think through how we live into this statement fully in all of our ministries and activities. But we wanted to go ahead and share this broad statement today for a few reasons. First, these are pressing issues. Real people who belong to this community at Embrace, they need to know how they can be involved and how we view them at our church. We've asked our LGBTQ siblings to be patient with us as we've gone through this process, and we feel like we can't ask these folks to wait any longer. We wanted to be clear that LGBTQ people can be fully involved in our church. We have heard many stories from people who have initially felt welcome when they go to their churches. They thought that they were going to be fully included at Embrace, but they found out later that there were barriers in place that prevented them from being fully involved. And these are people who love Jesus, and they were seeking to live out their callings in their church community, yet they weren't allowed to do that fully in their churches. This is just one example of the harm that churches have caused LGBTQ people, and we want to be clear about the opportunity for full inclusion because our LGBTQ siblings deserve that clarity. And then also, I just want to say that there's no other population that we would single out and say, if this applies to you, then you can't fully participate. And we're certainly not going to do the same in this situation. There's a few things I want to say. When we began this process, we shared a statement with the church that kind of detailed what we were trying to accomplish with our discernment process. And one thing we articulated was a commitment to support LGBTQ people in tangible and specific ways. And we need more time to discern exactly how to do that at Embrace, because we want many voices to be heard. We want all the concerns to be addressed. And the lead team is choosing not to make all those decisions on our own. We want the broader church to help us figure out the best ways to love and support this community, because you all have wonderful ideas and thoughts and commitments, and we want to hear from you. Another commitment we made was to provide a biblical and theological foundation for our decisions. We believe the Bible is the primary authority and guide for our lives and our community here at Embrace. And we have continued to take the Bible very seriously through deep study and reflection. And we have been both challenged and encouraged by the diversity of perspectives we've encountered. And we look forward to unpacking all this with you in the upcoming months. We're not going to share the biblical and theological insights today for a few reasons. Practically, as you can imagine, it's not possible to share all the theological and biblical work we've done in one meeting. This is going to require many meetings, a deeper conversation, much longer conversation over many sessions to break all this down and really have a lot of good conversation. We also want to put together resources that represent multiple perspectives so that you can have access to that, and that's going to take some time. We also believe that learning happens in community through discussion over many different meetings of meeting together and processing and asking questions and listening. And finally, and this is so important, that we want to get it right, which means we got to give adequate time and space to this. And so over the next few months, we're going to form shared language, and we hope to develop shared ownership of our communal identity at Embrace together. And so I'm so excited, and I know that Christina and our other pastors and leaders are so excited to begin this new chapter with you all at our church. And I look forward to all the wonderful learning and conversations we're going to have together. But first and foremost, I'm just excited that we're going to continue to walk down that path that Jesus is leading us. I believe a path of more radical love, a path of truly trying to be people who look like Jesus and live like Jesus in our community here in North Lexington. And so Christina is going to come and back on the screen, and she's going to share a little bit about our plan moving forward and how you all can be involved in what we're going to be doing over the next few months.
So as I'm sure you can tell from everything we have shared today, from the survey results and from Pastor John sharing the hope of the lead team moving forward, this journey is far from over, and we are looking forward to the next chapter, including more and deeper conversations with you as a congregation. So we have a plan to move forward and learn and talk and grow together. And we're going to do that in kind of two separate sessions over the summer and then over the fall as well. So we're going to start together this summer by reading a book together. And this is Karen Keene's Scripture, Ethics, and the Possibility of Same-Sex Relationships. And as you can tell, it's not a huge book. It's kind of small. So if you don't love reading, you can hang with us and check this one out. But the reason that we are going to read this particular resource is because Karen Keene is a scholar who's been suggested to us from multiple different people and places and resources. And she's also a scholar who has helped to inform the general sexual ethic document that we shared at the last meeting. The lead team has been in the process of developing. And that document and those thoughts are something you'll see more of as we move forward in the coming months. But we have engaged the work of Karen Keene throughout this process as a lead team, and think she does a really great job giving us a place to start in this conversation together in community. So we are going to study this book in two different sessions, kind of the first half in June, on June 25th, and the second half on July 23rd. And as we kind of go through this book together, we're going to discover that Karen Keene does a really good job presenting both sides of the issue, or both viewpoints, both the traditional and the progressive. She does it respectfully. She does a really good job pointing out the strongest arguments from each side, and helps to really clarify the history of the church's position on same-sex relationships as well. She also offers some really great biblical exegesis and some other ideas of what it could look like for us to move out of the stalemate that this conversation often ends up in, and to look with fresh eyes and new perspective at how the Bible and theology and ethics can help us move forward in loving more radically and more faithfully like Jesus loves. So we're going to read that book together this summer. And as we kind of gather for these book study sessions, you can attend one or both, whatever works for your schedule. We know the summer is kind of an in and out time for a lot of people, which is one reason we chose one not too long book. So hopefully you can participate in one of those meetings and still be part of the conversation. And I just want to let you know that lead team representatives will be present at those book studies, but this is not a teaching opportunity. This is not a time where we're going to be laying out what we think as a lead team, but really this is to create open conversation in our community. So lead team members who are present will kind of record your thoughts and your questions, and we will come back to those and interact with them in our fall sessions together. So in the fall, we plan to offer a 6-week curriculum where the lead team is going to use that time to lay out and invite our community to process through the entire scope of what we've learned and discerned together through our engagement with biblical and theological resources. We're going to dive into really the heart of the matter and how we have put together a framework for viewing and understanding what it looks like to live into that non-discrimination clause and to love and support and include the LGBTQ community at Embrace. Even in that process, even across those 6 sessions, we plan to have discussion. We plan to allow your feedback to shape the language that we develop together. And we're really understanding this at this point as an internal process, that we together as a church family are going to work through these resources, and we're together as a church family going to develop language. And we hope that this fall curriculum offers an opportunity for us to really dig into some helpful resources together. And I want you to know that through these sessions, you're going to be exposed to lots of resources across the spectrum of perspectives on this issue. So even though we're just reading one book this summer, that's not the only viewpoint that we're going to engage or present. And we also plan to offer a bibliography of various and diverse perspectives and resources to engage as well. So all of that material is coming at us this summer and this fall, and we look forward to engaging it and learning together. And we believe that the Holy Spirit is with us and will bring fruit from these conversations as we approach one another with humility and love. And so as we prepare to kind of enter into this next chapter together, we realize we've shared a lot of information with you today. We've shared a lot of the heart of the leadership of the church surrounding this process, and we want to hear from you. In the meeting that we held in person, we broke off into groups at this point and had conversation and the opportunity to give feedback, and that opportunity is available to you as someone watching this video as well. If you want to discuss further what you have heard in this video today, if you have questions, if you want to know more about where the leadership kind of has journeyed together and even more about how the pastors feel about this issue and our own personal journey of understanding, we are open to discussing all of that with you. And so you are able to reach out to us by email at this point, since I can't have my physical sign-up sheet over a video, and let us know if you would like to grab coffee or sit down and meet together with one of the pastors to talk through these issues. And when John says our doors are open and that we really want to have these conversations, that is a very genuine invitation. We believe that we are still learning, and that talking to you and sitting down with you is part of that learning process and is part of how we can all be shaped together to more faithfully follow Jesus, even in these matters, these really difficult matters that often lead to kind of stalemated conversation. We want to keep talking and to allowing the Spirit to do a fresh thing in our relationships together. So if you are interested in talking further, please send us an email, john@embraceyourcity.com or christina@embraceyourcity.com, and we will get a meeting set up with you and look forward to having those conversations with as many people want to unpack this together. And then we will, of course, continue to dive into discussion this summer as we read this book together. We'd like to thank you so much for your time and attention as you have waded through this survey information and heard our heart today through this video. And we do hope that as you continue to sit with this information and to join us on this journey, that you yourself will discover that God is meeting us and is walking with us as we pursue Jesus faithfully.